right, so we're back and ready to plunge headfirst into part 3 of Frankenstein.
Definitely, head first.
We've got those juicy excerpts straight from the text and, some seriously thought-provoking commentary from this literary enthusiast Bobby. Buckle up because things are about to get, well, intense is an understatement.
Yeah, Shelley doesn't hold back in this section. Victor's story takes some dark turns, that's for sure.
No kidding. And you know what I find really interesting? How Shelley tackles this whole issue of Victor's, well, reliability as a narrator right from the get-go.
Right. We've seen how passionate it is. I mean, borderline obsessive in the previous parts, so it makes you wonder,
Totally. Like, is he giving us the completely unvarnished truth?
Exactly.
Can we really trust his perspective?
And the clever thing is, Shelley anticipates that. She has Victor practically swearing on his life that he's being truthful. It's almost as if she's trying to head off any doubts we might have.
Like, hey, reader, I know this guy might seem a bit, well, intense, but trust me, he's telling it like it is.
Precisely. It's a subtle technique, but it's really effective.
It reminds me of, like, a really well-written counter-argument in an essay. You address that opposing viewpoint head on.
Yes. You dismantle it, and in doing so, you actually strengthen your own argument. Shelley's doing something similar here, bolstering Victor's narrative, even while acknowledging those potential flaws.
That's such a good point. And then on top of that, there's this, like, creeping sense of foreboding that starts to build. It's like a warning sign. Bobby even compares Victor to, get this, the Ancient Mariner.
Oh yeah, that's such a spot-on comparison. The Ancient Mariner, forever burdened by his tale, compelled to share it as both a warning and, a kind of penance.
Heavy stuff.
And what I find interesting is how Victor starts with holding information, particularly about the specifics of the creature's creation. It feels very deliberate, like he's, tempting fate.
Ooh, or maybe even trying to protect us from the full horror of what he's done.
Maybe, like he's saying, hey, something truly terrible is coming, and I'm not sure you're ready for it.
Right. But at the same time, he's also talking about his grand vision, creating a new species, becoming like a god. It almost feels, well, delusional, even for Victor.
It does, doesn't it? That kind of ambition can be intoxicating, and it often leads to, trouble.
Oh, yeah. We see it all the time in those classic mad scientist stories.
Exactly. But there's also this psychological element that Bobby points out. Victor's deep-seated yearning for his father's approval. It's like he's trying to overcompensate for some perceived rejection or inadequacy.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's something a lot of people can relate to, that need to impress your parents, to live up to their expectations.
Absolutely.
Maybe even surpass them.
Definitely. But what happens when that desire becomes all-consuming? Could that be a form of, that fatal flaw, the hamartia, that often leads tragic heroes to their downfall? That's a great question, and that's where that term hamartia comes in. It's a Greek term referring to a hero's tragic flaw, often a misjudgment or error that leads to their downfall. In Victor's case, it could very well be his ambition, his need for recognition, that blinds him to the potential consequences of his actions.
Right, so we're seeing those seeds of tragedy being sown, even as Victor celebrates his creation. Speaking of parental figures, let's dive into that excerpt where Victor gets those letters from his dad. The tone is, well, let's just say it's a bit passive-aggressive.
It totally is. That subtle guilt trip about correspondence, the implication that Victor is shirking his family duties. It's a classic tactic that I think many of us have probably experienced at some point in our lives.
Oh, absolutely. And I find Bobby's analysis of Victor's father as, like, embodying some of those less appealing aspects of Enlightenment thinking to be super insightful.
Right. The emphasis on logic over emotion, the possessiveness over Elizabeth. It adds a whole other layer of complexity to the novel's themes.
It really does. It's not just a scientist creating a monster. It's about those potential dangers of unchecked ambition and that tension between scientific progress and human feeling. And then, of course, we have the moment of creation itself. Years of work, all that anticipation, and then bam.
Horror.
Victor is instantly repulsed by what he's brought into the world.
It's such a powerful scene, and it plays on those primal fears we all have, Shelley uses such vivid imagery to describe the creature's appearance, tapping into that deep-seated fear of the unknown, the unnatural. It's pure Gothic horror, that blend of terror and, morbid fascination.
It's so effective. She doesn't shy away from the grotesque at all, which makes the horror all the more palpable. And Bobby makes a great point about how this moment of creation is also a moment of profound rejection.
Exactly. Victor, after pouring his heart and soul into creating this being, immediately recoils in horror. He sees the creature not as a triumph, but as a hideous mistake.
It's almost like a cautionary tale about the dangers of judging by appearances, of failing to see the humanity in something different from us.
It totally is. And it makes you think, what would have happened if Victor had reacted with compassion instead of fear? would the story have unfolded differently? It's a question worth considering. It really speaks to the power of our choices, even in the face of something unexpected.
It's just heartbreaking to think about, what happens next, William's murder, and then, well, the framing of Justine. It's just this whole whirlwind of tragedy and, injustice.
Yeah, and Shelley really, masterfully builds that suspense.
Yeah.
The missing picture, the circumstantial evidence, it all comes together to create this atmosphere of, suspicion and paranoia. You can totally understand why people jump to conclusions.
Right. You really do get swept up in the drama of it all. But then, you have to step back for a second and consider, what are the creature's motives? I mean, is this just pure, malice? Is it revenge for being abandoned? Or could there be something, I don't know, more complex at play here?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? It kind of lingers in the back of your mind. Is he trying to communicate something? To make a statement through these, pretty desperate acts.
Yeah.
I mean, Victor instantly blames the creature, but is that really a fair assessment? Or is his judgment just clouded by, guilt and that horror of what he's created?
Yeah, that's such a crucial point, I think. It's so easy to jump to conclusions, especially when you're dealing with things like fear and grief. We see what we expect to see, and sometimes we miss those other possibilities or interpretations. Have you ever experienced that yourself, where your initial perception of a situation, turned out to be, incomplete or maybe even totally inaccurate?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a totally human thing to do. Our biases, our preconceptions, they shape how we see the world. They can even lead us to make assumptions that are, let's just say, not entirely accurate.
Exactly.
And then there's poor Justine, reading her words as she faces execution, accepting her fate, but still clinging to that belief in, divine justice. It's just, it's heartbreaking.
It really is. It's like there's this poignant irony in her name, Justine, embodying justice, yet she's deeply wronged by the very system that's supposed to uphold it. It really makes you think about the complexities of justice, how elusive it can be, even in those seemingly straightforward situations.
It does, and it reminds me of other literary characters who face similar fates. The Ancient Mariner, Rosencrantz, and Guildenstern. They're all caught in these impossible situations, victims of forces beyond their control. It seems to be this recurring theme in literature, this idea that even the innocent can suffer, that justice isn't always served.
Right, it's not a guarantee. That's a really powerful observation, I think. It connects Frankenstein to this broader literary tradition and reminds us that injustice is, it's a universal human experience, a theme that resonates across time and cultures.
It does.
But Victor's reaction to all this is anything but passive. I mean, he vows revenge, right? And his words are they're dripping with this rage and despair. It's a turning point for his character, wouldn't you say?
Oh, totally. He's consumed by anger, driven by this single-minded desire to, hunt down the creature and make him pay for what he's done. It's you can see that clear parallel to Hamlet's quest for vengeance, that same relentless pursuit of retribution. But, we often see in these stories about revenge, that path rarely leads to peace or any sort of resolution. It usually just perpetuates the cycle of violence and suffering.
Right. More pain, more suffering. And it's ironic, because Victor's name itself signifies victory, right? But the path he's chosen is, it's anything but victorious. He's spiraling down into this abyss of despair and destruction. It's so far from any notion of true victory. It really makes you wonder, what does true victory even look like?
Right, and can it ever be achieved through revenge? Or does it require a different approach altogether? One that, breaks free from that cycle of violence and retribution? Those are big questions, and I don't think there are any easy answers. But maybe that's the point of Frankenstein, It challenges us to confront those tough questions, to wrestle with the complexities of, human nature, and to really think about the ethical implications of our choices.
So, we've seen Victor's descent into this darkness. We've seen the creature's actions and those pretty devastating consequences of, unchecked ambition. It's a lot to process, and it really feels like the story's, only just beginning to unfold.
It really does. And, it's important to remember that Frankenstein isn't just some, groundbreaking horror story. It was also this really sharp social commentary, reflecting those anxieties and ethical dilemmas of Mary Shelley's time.
Oh, absolutely. The Industrial Revolution was transforming society. Science was pushing boundaries. People were really grappling with those potential consequences of these rapid advancements. It's almost as if Shelley was holding up a mirror to society and asking, Are we creating monsters in the name of progress?
Right. And that question, it's still so incredibly relevant today, maybe even more so.
Oh, yeah.
Think about artificial intelligence or genetic engineering, all these ways we're, pushing the limits of what's possible. Are we being responsible creators? Or are we setting ourselves up for a future filled with, well, unintended consequences? It's a question we all need to wrestle with.
It's a chilling thought, for sure. But it's also what makes Frankenstein so timeless and thought-provoking. It's not just a scary story, it's a cautionary tale that forces us to confront our own capacity for both good and evil. What do you think?
I totally agree. It reminds us that that line between hero and monster is, well, it can be a lot blurrier than we'd like to believe. Victor, this brilliant scientist, is also the one who unleashes this horror on the world, right? And the creature, initially driven by a desire for connection and acceptance, becomes, well, twisted by that rejection and the violence he faces. It makes you wonder, are monsters born or are they created?
It's true, that complexity, that nuance is what makes Frankenstein more than just a simple good versus evil narrative. It's about the choices we make, the responsibilities we bear, and that, the enduring power of both love and hate. I think as we reach the end of part 3, we're left with this feeling of unease, knowing that the story is, well, far from over. Those consequences of Victor's actions are going to continue to, reverberate.
They really are. And it leaves us with some pretty profound questions to ponder. If you were in Victor's shoes, what would you have done? Would you have sought revenge? Would you have tried to, understand and help the creature? Or would you have just run away from it all, from those consequences of your actions?
Those are tough questions, and I don't think there are any easy answers. But maybe that's the whole point of Frankenstein. It challenges us to face those difficult questions head on, to grapple with the complexities of human nature, and to think critically about those ethical implications of our choices, Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Frankenstein, Part 3. We hope you found it insightful, thought-provoking, and maybe, just a little bit unsettling.
Yeah. And if this conversation has sparked your curiosity, we encourage you to keep exploring this extraordinary novel. Frankenstein has so much to offer, and there's always something new to discover within its pages. Happy reading! Teeny S.